And sweet. Okay, so today we are here with Jonathan Pham, the stringer over at TCU. And for our first question, I just wanted to have you kind of introduce yourself. How'd you get into stringing and how'd you get into stringing in the business sense?
Okay. Well, my name is Jonathan Pham. I am the operations coordinator here at TC for men's and women's tennis. I also kind of do stringing on the side for my business name is called String Busters. So that's that's the other half of it. But mostly my main role is with David Roditi and Lee Walker. They're my supervisors, and yeah, that's pretty much what I've got going on here.
Sweet. So how'd you get into the stringing world? Like, did someone teach you first? Were you a player and then started stringing on rackets? How'd that come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of funny how these origin stories come about. For me, I had just started playing tennis in high school. Now, mind you, like 13 or 14. For freshman year in high school, the only reason I even picked up tennis was because my friends were doing it, and it was between tennis or PE class. And I didn't want to be, the only one in PE class, you know, walking laps around the school or, sitting on the gym floor and waiting for your name to be called. So I just took a leap of faith and, joined in with my friends. So that's kind of like how I got involved with tennis. I knew nothing about the sport, never played a sport like football or anything like that growing up. So just a total, relying on my friends and hoping that by being with my friends, it would be kind of enjoyable, even though I knew nothing about the sport. And so, next thing I knew, I was in love with it. Even though for the first 3 or 4 months, I was hitting every other ball over the fence. I loved chasing the fuzzy yellow ball around the court. And so I think that's kind of where it started. Now, as far as stringing goes, it's a little bit of a different story. I think I want to say like I had been familiar with the concept of stringing. I'd seen a stringing machine be used a few times in our room. I think there's like a home room that we were all part of while we were waiting to go on the tennis court. And so I'd seen, some people that knew how to string there before the coach at the time didn't know how to string. So it was almost always students stringing on it. And I'd become intrigued by it, I think, just because, anytime I'm sitting there bored, I get sucked into something. And then that's kind of how I guess it first started. I was intrigued by the process. I'd never seen a racket getting strung before. Now, who knows if it was being done the right way? For all we know, I mean, for sure, I think it was taking them at least an hour and a half, 2 hours to string a racket. So I think going a year later down the road, it was my sophomore year. I had finally broken my first string. And so, me and 3 of my friends, we set off on the great journey to try and attempt to string a racket, from memory or, try to figure it out along as we go. And this was 2006. So YouTube still wasn't quite a thing. I think it was in its infancy. We didn't have, as many resources as so many people as we do nowadays. And so like it took me and 3 of my friends probably a little over 2 hours to figure out how to string a racket from start to finish. Who knows what kind of knots we were using? Who knows, if we even did it the right way? But lo and behold, it miraculously got off the machine, and it played just fine, at least fun enough for me. So, I think that's kind of how the whole love for stringing kind of got ignited. And then once I, once I kind of figured out how it was done, I wanted to get, better at it, faster at it, learn to improve on it. Thankfully, I had a new coach at that time who kind of gave me pointers as we went on. And then pretty soon I was practicing on everybody else's rackets and became, the team MVP solely for the reason that nobody could hit tennis balls if it wasn't for me. And so that's kind of how it all started. That was all the way back in 2006. Crazy to say.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's funny. Whenever I think of all all the people I've interviewed and just talked to, like, I'm active on all like the forums that like the Facebook stuff, and like just asking how they get into it. Everyone has like a nightmare of an experience on their first racket. And for so many people, like they have that experience and like, I'm done. Like I'm paying someone to do this. I'm not touching another one. But there's like that select few of us who are just like, dude, like I need to get good at this. Like I'm going to spend all my time trying to get faster and like learn how to do it properly. And I think it's interesting because like I've met a lot of people who want to learn how to string, and I teach them or I show them the videos and like, man, like it took me 2 hours, took me 3 hours. And they're like, that's just not for me. And I'm like, no, there's like a steep learning curve. Like if you stick with it, you're going to get it. And some people they just can't do it. So it's always cool to hear those stories of how some people love it after the struggle and some people hate it. That's always interesting to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd agree with you there. I'd say stringing was definitely kind of like a tricky to learn and still harder to master because there's always something to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And even back then, I vaguely remember that story, but I do know how it went about. And who knows if we did it right? I mean, we just kind of used our wits and tried to figure it out. But I think I can see where a lot of people can be turned off by that one experience. For me, it kind of was intriguing because I was like, I knew that there's probably a better way that I could have approached this section of the racket. So what is the best way to do it? And then I think I can also see where a lot of people would be frustrated and never try it again. There's, every once in a while there's people, because I do try and teach. I have a lot of student managers that come through, and I try and teach them how to string. And it's always tricky getting them involved in that process for that first week or so. But then I think once you have enough reps, it kind of becomes second nature, and then they kind of see like, well, I can kind of see why you kind of like it now, even though it's still like a lot of repetitive work. It could be boring, or depends, I guess, on the personality.
Right. Yeah. I think back to my first racket that I did. And at the time I was playing with that Yonex Polytour Spin, like the blue one.
Okay.
And so my first racket I ever strung was that like 4-sided, 5-sided poly. And I remember finishing the first one and like I was almost in tears because of how much it hurt my fingers. And I'm like, I'm never doing this again. Like I will never ever do that again. And now it's my favorite thing to do. And I think it's kind of funny, like I don't know. I'm not typically the person to take something that's super hard and want to do it over and get really good at it. That's just not my personality. But it's just something about stringing that's just like, I don't know. There's just something different about like learning the little tiny things that like improve your time by like 0.5 seconds that you're like, oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I don't know what it is, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's cool. It's cool. That's why I love talking to other stringers and they've had similar experiences.
Yeah, it's crazy that you chose such a challenging string for your first
Yeah. Well,
first
like I
go.
was just like, so the way I got into it was that my ex-girlfriend's dad taught me. And so like we just had my racket with my string. He's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll teach you. And I remember pulling out the pack and his eyes got wide and he was like, no, please, no. And I'm like, well, it's my racket. I want to put my string in it. He's like, please don't. And so I just remember it's like he was so nervous because he knew it was gonna be a nightmare. And yeah. But,
Oh yeah.
Sweet. So I kind of want to talk about how you got started with your relationship with TCU and kind of how you got put into that team manager position.
So yeah, let's see. Started going to TCU here in 2009. So I think by that point I had already been stringing for 2 or 3 years, I would say. I knew, especially like junior, senior year of high school, I always wanted to be involved with the tennis program. I knew I wasn't going to be good enough to play, but I knew, that maybe I can be a contributor in a different way off the court, whether that was being good enough at stringing and then using that expertise to, work as a team manager, or, just be around the match day environment. Because I knew nothing about college tennis, but I knew like it would kind of be a nice way to be involved in college during my time here at TCU. And especially in high school, tennis was like one of the few things that kept me out of trouble. I knew it was kind of like the one thing that motivated me to, get through the school day in the classroom. Because at the end of the day, there was always that, that moment where you can change out and then hit the courts, or you go hit the track, your conditioning. I think for me, it was just nice to be on my feet and running around and just being with friends and traveling and playing. So I kind of wanted to try and replicate that experience in college, even though I wouldn't be the one on the court. So I think the first 2 years I got shot down, not quote unquote shot down, but they had already had somebody who was stringing for the men's team. So I struck out the first 2 years. Year three, I got lucky. This was 2011. Um, I want to say Coach Roditi had just finished his first year coaching, and they were actually looking for somebody who could be a manager or a stringer for the teams. And so I remembered walking up one day. Every year I tried once to get an interview or something. In the first 2 years, I would walk up to the building. They would be like, "Oh, we already have somebody. Try it again next year." So 2011, I got lucky. I ran into a student athlete. I actually remember who it is now. His name was Max Stevens, and he was on his way out. And I was like, "Well, are you guys looking for a stringer?" And then he kind of like stood there for a few seconds. He was like, "Well, actually, I think we do. You want to meet the coach?" I was like, "Yes, please." So that's kind of how I did it. It was basically a cold call. Coach Roditi and Coach Chia, he was the assistant at the time. I got to sit down with them. They had never had a student manager before, so it was all new for all of us. But they basically, wasn't really much of an interview. I think it was kind of more like a welcome to the team. This is kind of what we expect. It's going to be a lot of hours, and it could be a lot of stringing, and who knows if you're going to love it. I was just excited to be part of the team. So, in my mind, I was just thinking like, look, I don't care about all the specifics. We'll figure it out. And then David and Mark kind of chime in at some point in the interview, and they were like, well, since you'll be part of the team, the goal is to always win a championship and get you a ring. I was like, in my mind, I had no idea what a ring was. And so like, I was just like, well, it sounds kind of cool, like a cool little trophy or award, but we'll see about it. It wasn't at the forefront of my mind. And so that's kind of how I got my start here at TCU. I know the first year was a big learning curve, just because I never strung that many rackets before. I would say it was crazy. And then I knew we had tried to do some sort of like a work schedule to where I would kind of come in when they were practicing in the afternoons and then string during that time. But basically by day two, it was like, we had already thrown that away and was like, all right, well, you come in, as long as the stuff is done, then it doesn't matter what time you come in. So I adopted the whole come in like after practice, stay there as long as I needed, which, was anywhere between like 5 and 10, 5 and 11, 5 and 12, somewhere in that time frame. Didn't matter to me. I just was happy to be amongst guys I thought were amazing. In TCU, we were still in the Mountain West Conference then, so we weren't nearly as big as we are today. But it's kind of cool standing amongst giants in a sense. A lot of really talented players, and they were all really nice guys. They didn't really have big heads or big egos. They were just kind of cool. It was just kind of cool getting to know them and work for them. So I think pretty soon from there, my job was evolved from just stringing rackets to kind of handling, match day set down, preparation and marketing, because, here we love to try and get people to come out to our matches. So, we could be doing a bunch of social media campaigns. We could be standing out in the middle by the library trying to get people to come out to matches. We could be, doing some crazy tennis ball promotion where we flood Frog Fountain with a bunch of tennis balls and get people to guess how many tennis balls are in the fountain. I mean, the marketing ideas are wild here, and all I know is that whatever needed to be done, I was like, all right, let me see if I can find an answer to it. And so that's how it kind of started with that one year. So let's see, 2011, and now it's 2022. So we're going into year 11 now. It's been a fun ride.
Yeah, that's cool. I think one of the coolest things, if anyone listening is in the Fort Worth area, you like need to get out there and see one of those TCU matches live. I think one of my favorite parts about it is watching how you interact with the players and how the players interact with you in particular, because it's such a like, yeah, sure, you're not on the court with them. Sure, you aren't playing, you're not practicing with them, but like you're very clearly like part of the team. Um, and I think that's sort of, I don't know, you don't get that a lot. I feel like you don't get that a lot with other D1 teams either. Whenever I kind of go to their matches and see things like that. But to me, it seems like you're really like part of the team. And I mean, like, they can't play without a stringer and they can't play with a crowd without someone to set up stuff. And it's kind of cool to see that, like, for me, I'm not a crazy good tennis player. I won't be. I love to play, but I won't be. And so it's kind of cool to think that the stringers are still respected a lot of the times, because, you know, we can be oversights. And so it's kind of cool to just see how, you know, they respect you a lot and they clearly love having you around. If anyone goes to a match, it's very obvious that like you're loved by all the spectators, and it's a really cool experience because, you know, that team, to me, I've seen a lot of D1 teams play in person. I've seen a lot of different team dynamics. I've seen the silent ones, the loud ones, the ones who call out each other's names, things like that. And I feel like TCU's is kind of right in the middle, especially whenever like I watch teams like, I'm not trying to say Baylor's way of playing is bad, but I'm not a fan of how aggressive they can get towards other teams. And I feel like TCU's is all like building up each other rather than cheering on the double faults or rather than cheering on the couple unforced errors that that won a set, you know, like they tend to cheer on their actual teammates. And that's one thing that I've respected about TCU as a team for a really long time. It's really cool to see in person. Definitely.
Yeah, no, it's certainly kind of fun to come to a match out here. I know part of the job description that I didn't realize back in 2011 was getting to know the tennis community as well around Fort Worth. And so, it took a long time for me to kind of, recognize the familiar faces, and then, oh, well, I see them at every match. Well, let me try and talk to them and get to know their name and their story. And then from there, you kind of realize like, hey, they're just as integral part of our matches as a player or coach or staff member like myself. So from there, you kind of get to, learn their story a little bit. And then for me, it's kind of the cool way of getting to getting to know members of our community. And like you said, like it's such a diverse crowd here that, it's a little bit of young, a little bit of old. I would say we're a little more on the conservative side as far as cheering. We're not nearly as aggressive. But part of that is because we've got older people in the crowds that are more traditional. They don't like cheering in the middle of a point. But you've got some younger folks sitting next to them that are rowdy because their friend is playing on the court and they just hit an amazing shot. And they just want to make sure that their support is heard or felt in the middle of a match. So it's kind of cool when you've got the clash of all these personalities coming together. And so that's why I also think it's very cool to have just kind of very cool just to be here and be part of that match day environment. It's definitely a unique one that I haven't really seen replicated. Maybe like Nona, for NCAA tournament, because they've got so many different people from different fans from different schools, congregating together. But certainly at a home match, you go somewhere else, it could be decently packed or it could be very sparse. Just kind of hard to tell. It could be a coin flip. But here we try and get them to come out. We entice them with free food, free snacks, free amenities. We make it a family day. Sometimes we have a bounce house for the kids or a mini tennis court that kids can play on while the adults are watching the matches go on. So it's wild, like hearing myself kind of explain it. I impress myself even with how I'm able to kind of juggle it all. And so kind of going backwards to the question you originally asked, I was a student manager all the way to I graduated in 16. And so in 16, I think after I graduated, I decided to kind of like freelance for a couple of years. And that's kind of how I got into more of the business side of stringing, because I got my LLC and then, strung for TCU as one of my clients from 2016 to 2018. So I wasn't a staff member or student manager or anything then. And then in 2018, TCU offered to hire me back on as a temporary part-time operations coordinator. So that's where I am, or that's where I currently am up to the present day, just as operations coordinator. Hopefully working my way towards a full-time position. But I've kind of been in every single different role since then, as a student manager and then as a quote unquote volunteer, because yes, I was stringing, but I was still there at the matches and I was still helping do the same things that I always did when I was a student at TCU. And then now I get to do even more, where it's more of the back end side of stuff, where it's like operations, logistics, a little bit of travel, food. I mean, it's crazy the kinds of things an athletics team needs to kind of work from day to day. And so it's, and you definitely recognize kind of like the importance. It's not just of my role, but every single staff member's role on a team. It's not just a coach and a player. Trainer is like, up there right after the coaches. I would say kind of like a director of ops / stringer / fitness coach. They're all up there as well. And then you've got, your game day staff, you've got your director of the tennis center, there's so many faces and different roles that we need to pull a good match day off. Like this past weekend when we had Florida and Tennessee in town, I was out sick, but thank goodness there was a bunch of support staff that were able to make it happen. And we had an incredible weekend and coach was raving about it. And we had a tailgate trailer. People were able to come out and get drinks and free pizza. And it's the best kept secret here at TCU is what we like to say, because not a lot of people know that you can, drink and have fun at a tennis match like one of ours. So
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things to me is you were talking about the spectators, like who shows up and generational wise. I've seen some WTA professional events, I've seen some ATP professional events, and I think the biggest difference between watching really any college level sport, but mainly like that D1 level, especially with tennis being so individual, is some guys on that team they're professionals, like they are very highly ranked in the world. And the fact that some of these guys out here watching them play, like they're in the same classes. Like it's not like, oh man, there's Roger Federer, I can't ever touch him. He's way, way up above my level. It's like these guys are like, you guys are sharing answers in class. Like you're partners on a group project. Like thinking of it that way, it's just such a cool dynamic because people aren't out there like, wow, that's Roger Federer. Like I've seen him on YouTube. It's like, hey, that's my friend whoever, that's my friend Sander. It's like that's so cool to me because it's like it changes the whole dynamic because people aren't cheering for, yeah, you're number one. It's like that's like one of my friends, but they're still playing like basically professional level tennis. And it's just really cool. And yeah, that's why I love watching Division I college tennis, not necessarily more than the pros, but like in terms of atmosphere, it's definitely up there. Just because that some of the people around you are like just straight up friends with what the guys playing. And it's like, yeah, it's really cool. So it's cool to hear that you really enjoy working with all that stuff. And,
yeah, no, I'm glad. I mean, yeah, you're one of the few people who's kind of caught on to that too. It's like, these guys are just, we want to think of them as grown-ups, but the truth of the matter is these are still 18, 21-year-olds. They're not ready to make adult decisions every day and have a professional routine, daily or weekly or monthly routine. These guys are still learning how it all works. And so here in college, we give them the chance to kind of dip their toes in the water and figure out what it takes to be a professional. But it also gives you the chance to, work towards your college degree and have a social life and still be part of all those fun things that traditional college students do, go to football games, make friends. And like you said, like a lot of these fans that come out, recognize these players more as just, classmate or a friend, or hey, he said he played tennis, so I wanted to see what how they play. Not a lot of people realize that, like, well, his name is, Pedro, and he's top 500 in the world,
Yeah.
world rankings. I think a few years ago we had a guy, who walked, around this campus just like all of us, and nobody knew that, he would be a household name one day on the ATP. Cameron Norrie, this, another one like us. He was making mistakes just like all of us and learning from it, and was, was a baller then, and look at him now. So
Yeah. I vividly remember, I think they were actually playing Baylor. It was a TCU versus Baylor match. And we were it was me and a couple friends went, and we were watching Famba play. And I will never forget this moment, because there was a guy sitting to our right, and he looks over at me and he goes, is that Luca Famba? I said, yeah, it is. And he's like, the big dude. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, he's in my class, and he told me that he plays tennis. He's like, I didn't know he was like professionally ranked. I'm like, yeah, he's not some like 40-year-old guy who picks up a racket every weekend. Like, he knows what he's doing. And that was just really cool to me, because it just kind of hit me. I'm like, these guys are like, they're just people, but they're just like us. They're not this transcendent crazy person, but it's just such a cool environment. And I wish college tennis, I'm hoping in the future that they start to get more like TV style coverage, on not just those big championship style things, because it's just such a like good environment. And it seems like such a bummer that it's not so massively like televised, because it's like it's good enough to be on TV, but they just need the viewership. So yeah.
it's certainly one of the more unique college sports out there to watch, because
Yeah.
in the singles portion you've got 6 matches going on at the same time. Not even in professional tennis do you get to watch more than 1 or 2 courts, if you're lucky, maybe 2 courts of action at the same time. So for me, of course, I'm a little biased, but when you're watching a dual match unfold, your eyes kind of get to dark from one court to another, wherever the action is. Your ears kind of pick up on any emotional outburst or something going on. So it's kind of cool, because there's never really a dull moment. And so I wish, like you said, Kyle, like I wish there was a lot of more coverage, because it's certainly, especially if you can kind of compress it down to a certain time frame. I think that's the biggest con, is that dual match can take anywhere closer and sometimes well past 3 hours. Hopefully that there's a way to kind of condense it to where you can have it fit a TV time slot, because it would definitely be awesome to kind of promote to a new crowd, and get them involved into tennis more, in that regard. But yeah, for the diehards, for sure, it's there's a reason why we all keep coming back to watch a match.
Oh yeah.
Every week or 2 weeks.
Sweet. So I'm gonna skip this third question and come back to that. So on number 4, I kind of getting into the equipment side, because obviously you do a lot of that. I'm kind of curious, what sort of knowledge do the players have on their equipment? Like, are they well aware? Like, are they coming in there and they're saying, I want this string, I know I want this string, I want this tension, these are my rackets? Or are they coming to you like, hey, can I have some tips? Or are they just like, put whatever in there, I don't really care? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. I think it's dependent. Like when I first started in 2011, not to say that we were a small school and we didn't recruit well, we recruited a lot bigger than the size we actually were. But, a lot of our recruits were, had played high school tennis or had just picked up tennis at a late age. Like I think one of the famous guys, he didn't start playing tennis until 15, and he was able to come here and play at TCU. A lot of those guys, they're not as picky, I would say. They definitely have little to no knowledge of tennis equipment, I would say. And then once you get into more of your higher renowned recruits, your 5 stars, your blue chip recruits, your international players that, were ranked playing juniors, they kind of have a little bit more knowledge, but I still think it's prevalent amongst juniors in college and even some professional players that it's mostly based on feel for them. They kind of, that's how they kind of describe, or that's how a lot of my interactions with them kind of break down. It's like, well, tell me how you feel about this racket or this string or this tension. And the way that they tell me, I'm able to kind of convert that into, okay, well, that translates into this, or this is how I can make my adjustments here to kind of make it feel better for them. So like the short answer to your question was like a lot of them really don't know a lot about their gear, their string, or their tensions. But in more recent years, I think a lot of them have kind of at least have an inkling of what they like. And then I can kind of take those words and feelings and kind of translate it to how can we kind of quantify this, or, put it into numbers or specs or something like that. And so it's kind of cool seeing it over the years, especially now that we get a lot more higher rated recruits from around the world. We've got some of the best players from like the UK and a lot of British guys actually, and then France, and then the Netherlands and the Czech Republic. A lot of those guys come in they grew up using kind of what they are already now. And then my job is to kind of like tweak it and see how we can get a little more playability out of it, or something that plays a little more forgiving or gives them a little more pop, especially as they translate into hard courts here. A lot of them grew up playing on clay or grass. And here it's a little bit different because the surface is a little slower, the balls are heavier, doesn't move as well. So we're looking for any extra help we can get in terms of pop or, just playability in general.
Yeah, cool. That's interesting. That seems to be my experience for the most part, is a feel-based thing, especially whenever working with the higher level players. It's interesting to me. I guess it's like the stringer in me or whatever, but like I don't want to play with a racket or a string that I don't know like everything about it. But I have a ton of friends where they're like, I'm like, hey, like you should try this racket out. And I'm like, this is why. And they're like, don't tell me. Like, don't tell me anything about it. Just hand me the thing and let me play with it. And I feel like that's if you have the money for it, that's a really, really good way to go about it. Or if you have someone who has the knowledge to help you customize something. But it's interesting. That was kind of the guess that I would have had, was that they kind of just go solely off feel. And yeah, because especially coming from different surfaces too, I assume, not sure, but I assume that as soon as they get here, it's like a whole different dynamic and like speed of everything. So I would assume they would tweak some stuff, but not drastically change it because they're so used to whatever it is. But yeah, that's interesting to hear. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I mean, like at some point I feel like you should really know your equipment well, or at least have someone who knows your equipment well for you. But yeah, because I see a lot of higher level guys. Like I think of I say higher level guys, the guys on like the Hope team here, who just really aren't aware of what they're using. And I'm just like, why are you using that racket? And they're just like, I don't know, I just picked it up. And then like we have like a guy who has like a couple Blade V6s and a couple Blade V7s and a couple of the V5s, and he plays with them interchangeably as if they're the same thing. And I'm like, they're not the same racket. And he's like, well, but it's all a blade. I'm like, no, like there's differences. And then so stuff like that, I don't know. But it's interesting, especially with like the drastic differences in people's game styles and everything. So.
For sure, yeah. The tennis tech in me would agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, there are little nuances and things, and even changing, to a different model. Because I hate that in the tennis manufacturing world that, a new racket model comes out in August or January, or well, doesn't really coincide with our fall season. It's like the start of our fall season, which is in August, or the start of our spring season, which is in January. So most of the time we're stuck dealing with already something that's considered obsolete, or something that, has already been out for months. And I hate having to play catch up in that regard. But I think it's still important that for these guys, they're comfortable with what they're wielding. I know one guy who I haven't touched Well, actually, no, that's a lie because I got him to change rackets and then I got him to change strings. So we do have that. But like I do love having them test things out without kind of diving into the specifics. I like to hand them something like, hey, I strung it with something different. Try it out and tell me what you think. I think it's better that way rather than telling them, this is what I put in here. This is why it's supposed to play better for you. I don't want to just, you know, complicate things in their minds. I just want them to kind of take it as it is, take a hit with it for a practice, and then come back to me with their feedback. And it's kind of a cool way to get them to try out new strings or new frames, or even new tensions. Like if something something world shattering was to come out tomorrow, there's probably a good bet that I would have at least half of them try it out just to see what it would be like. Um, but that's part of the fun. I get to live through them because I'm not good enough to hit the courts myself and split hairs. But for them, I can give it to them, and they trust me well enough to make decisions for them. Whether that's having them switch the strings, so I have them try out 3 or 4 different strings, or if it's the summer and I tell them, hey, here's a couple of demos I think you should try. If you have the time. So it's kind of a never-ending process. Well, we're always looking for the holy grail in terms of rackets or strings or even shoes or whatever. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, we got to find something that we can settle on and use for 8, 10 months of the year.
Yeah, cool. I want to throw in an extra question because I just kind of thought about it. In terms of when they switch rackets, let's say that they're just switching, like just like the newer model. Is that
Yeah.
typically like what? I hate bringing up Fomba for 20 seconds, but I literally just saw the picture of him. He just had the new V Core. I just saw the picture like 2 minutes before he joined the call.
For sure.
So like for changing from that green V Core Pro to the new one, was that did he like come to you and say, hey, I want to switch to this? Did Yannick say something? Did like what causes that change? And like, is there really a reason for it?
Usually a combination of a few things. Sometimes at the end of the day, it just happens to be timing. I mean, for Luke, he was down to 3 of his rackets because he had broken, I think, a couple of them over the summer and fall. So he was down to 3. Yonex wasn't making any more of the V Core Pro model,
Okay.
whatever year that was, the 2020, I guess,
2019,
2019, I think.
19. Yeah.
2018 or
Okay.
2019. See, that tells you how often we switch. So frequently that like I lose track myself. And then it's me kind of like realizing like, oh well, they just came out with this racket in August. You want to give it a go, and then if you like it, we'll just buy you a new set of them and
Yeah,
have you commit to it. But
that
even
makes
for
sense.
him, yeah, even for him, it was kind of like I reiterating to him, just tell me how it feels. If it feels too different, it's okay. We can get the old ones, but I want to make sure that you love the new one before you commit. And so, for him, he tells me that, it feels like he gets more control with that frame than he does with the old one, which strikes me as curious because, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, the beam is like a millimeter thicker. So
Hmm.
in my mind, it should be more powerful. The spacing's a little wider, so you should get more pop and spin. So it's kind of a little counterintuitive to what I thought, but he's the one playing with it. So far, so good, working out for him. I mean, had a huge win against Florida the other day, and even right now, he's only got 2. We're getting 3 more for him, so that way he'll have a set of 5. And so that's kind
Nice.
of how those stories come about. It's just kind of like, well, not making these rackets anymore. So it's either we stock up on a whole bunch of them, or we switch you over to the new one and try to make it play about the same, or we get it totally brand new different frame. So it
Yeah.
was kind of a fun story for him too, because when he came here to TCU, he was using Technofiber. I think he was obviously from France, repping the Technofiber brand. It's a huge. I think he was like one of their flagship players in the juniors. And so, he played his first year with Technofiber, which was all right. Here in the States, the customer service isn't that great. It was really hard to try and get replacement rackets for him. And eventually, I had gone like a month without hearing anything from from the rep. And so at the same time, our coaches were talking with Famba about, well, let's have you try, something different, see if we can get a little more power. because the Technofibers play a little more dead, a
Mhm.
little more traditional, a lot more control oriented. So we were trying to find something that gives them a little more free power on the serve, gives them a little help on the forehand. And so I think at the end of the day, he was deciding between the Yonex V Core, red, and then the V Core Pro, the green one at that time. And
Mhm.
uh, so it's always a fun little journey whenever a player is contemplating a switch. I kind of have a hand in that because they kind of trust me and, they ask for my opinion. And, for me, I kind of try and simplify it as much as I can. And, like I was telling Luke, like, well, I'm sure the red V core is amazing, whenever you hit a good serve or rip a forehand. But if you're at a third set in a match, you want something that you can count on. So that's why he settled on the V Core Pro because it still gives him that sense of control that he needs, especially on a deuce point or late in the third set. So I think it's worked out pretty good for him so far. I think overall, over switching from Technofiber to Yonex, he's had a good couple of years so far.
Yeah, definitely cool. So I want to talk a little bit about talk about customization experience. So I don't have a lot. I would like to get more into it. We're actually thinking about getting a swing weight machine here for the program, and me and the guy who run the PTM program want to like make it a bigger deal with the PTM students because I'm kind of like the only big string lover. um, but anyway, so what kind of a process do you typically go through customization, and just like quickly, what's your reasoning for doing a lot of those?
Yeah, no, I think Kyle, with your experience, first of all, it's awesome that you bring that perspective to the PTM program because I'm sure a lot of them kind of understand it more from a business side. But what about from the technical standpoint? So it's probably very handy to have your input there, and it's awesome that you guys are willing to invest and get the equipment and kind of at least tinker with and know the concept of swing weight because I think there's a lot of people who still don't understand how swing weight works. Um, and I think the other week I had a coach that was talking to me, and he was interested in the swing weight machine and how much it cost, and whether it would have been a good investment. To which I always say, absolutely, it's an amazing tool to have, and you need it if you want any sense of consistency within a program for sure. Um, for as far as customizing, I mean, I would definitely consider myself more of like well, let's be honest, being honest, I always consider myself as a really good amateur stringer, because I kind of learned it myself and I picked it up as a hobby and I got really good at it, but I never really had any formal, you know, professional stringing experience. The same I would say as far as customizing goes. It's what I read off of forums or YouTube videos, or I kind of understand the concept of how adding weight in certain spots kind of kind of kind of affects a racket in a different way. And so that's kind of what I have mostly to go off of. Thankfully, when it comes to customizing rackets here at TCU, especially for our players, we're not doing anything too drastic. We're not, slapping 20 grams of weight and handing it to them and be like, here, this is going to be better for you. I like to take more of a methodical approach and kind of bring it up to a player, especially somebody who I feel could benefit from weight, and just explain to them kind of like the pros and cons of it. Of course, the pros always almost outweigh the cons, but adds more stability. Especially to a lighter frame. Gives you a little more, we could say, pop, quote unquote, in a sense, and just depending on where you put the weight, it can kind of complement your style, whether you're more of an awkward player or somebody who loves playing from the baseline. And so, I kind of go through it with them and then have them try out 2 or 3 different setups, starter setups, I would say, where I just added a small amount of weight in the head, about anywhere between 3 and 5 grams. And then I kind of counterbalance it by adding weight in the handle as well. and then see how they react to it. I've had players over the years that hate it, so they play with a stock racket all their college careers. I have some that are really receptive to it. And they're like, well, what if we tried moving the weight here? Because it felt really weird on the backhand. So I want to try it in this area. So once they kind of get into it, they kind of, that's when I really get to start having fun, and I kind of, show them how the machines correlate, how the specs come out to read differently if I shift the weight from here from 3 and 9 to 12 o'clock, for example. And so, it's still very rudimentary. I know there's a more formal process, especially, as I've watched a lot of colleagues that have worked with players, they have more of a professional approach because they're more of them are on court with the players and they can kind of see how they hit and then they can kind of make changes on the fly right there for the player until they find something that they love. Me, it's kind of more like a bit of trial and error. If they don't like something, then we scrap that idea. And if there's something that they kind of like, then we kind of expand on that a little more and kind of dig into it and see why they like it. And if there's something we can come to that's a bit of a compromise that works out well for them, or or is it best just to leave it stock? I don't know. Every player has a different solution, and so it's kind of fun getting to go through that process with each and every one of them.
Yeah, cool. So for my last question, I asked, I don't know if you heard my latest episode with Smitty from Mains and Crosses, but I asked him if you had to pick out some common trends that you're seeing in rackets string technology between the college guys. I was kind of curious just for you to kind of talk about specifically like what weight class are most of those rackets, and kind of like tension wise, what are you seeing like across the board and that sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah, I can kind of like luckily I have a spreadsheet that's sitting on my desk. I was trying to update it because these guys are switching strings or switching rackets like crazy. So sometimes it's hard for me to keep tabs on them. But I know like for sure, at least amongst our team, the weight range, uh, they're playing with a little to moderate amount of lead tape or weight or weighting. So most of the rackets are kind of somewhere in the neighborhood of about 335 and 360 grams. So that's strung with overgrip and everything on it. So, has a little more heft than stock, nothing that's insanely heavy, but it's notable enough to where it does add stability and and helps them out in the court, especially once you move from juniors to college level, you're playing guys day in and out that hit a ton of spin, a lot of pop. So anything, especially if the racket is feeling a little flimsy, you're not going to play at your best with the stock racket. So these are all. It looks like I think they all got some sort of weight, even if it's as simple as a leather grip. Leather grip adds weight. And
Are those common? Are most of the guys using leather grips?
I mean, a few of our guys are using leather, and there's a lot of teams that I've strung for where a lot of their rackets do have leather on them. It's still not as common as synthetic, but it's kind of it's it's making more of an occurrence, I would say, especially once you get into a moderate amount of weighting. A lot of these rackets will come with leather grip just because it's easier to add weight, easier to add mass with a leather grip and then a little bit of mass as opposed to just trying to stuff a bunch of weight in the pallet,
Yeah,
or under the butt cap.
I've
So
definitely jumped on that leather grip bandwagon in the last couple of years. I can't play with a racket without one now. It just feels terrible in my hand.
yeah, and you can kind of tell like a lot of people who are a lot of players who are a little more like on court or serve and volley, they'll love the leather grips. Whereas somebody who's more of a baseliner might be like, well, it hurts my hands. And for some of my players, I kind of transition them into leather because their hands get super sweaty, and a leather grip just dries a lot faster than the synthetic grip. So for me, that's kind of like the biggest change for me is for them to go from synthetic to leather, especially in the summer months where it's so humid here in Texas. Any little help we can get, and who knew that something as simple as switching to a leather grip could be such a good quality of life change. So I'm a huge proponent of leather grips. Swing weight range, I would say, these guys aren't playing with anything extremely heavy. Trying to think anywhere from about mid 310s to about 340, 345 in terms of swing weight. So once again, we're not talking anything absurdly heavy, but still plenty maneuverable. But it does start to tinker with that realm of, let's add a little more pop to our shots, or let's add some more stability without taking away from too much maneuverability. And so and then that's kind of just on my guys' side alone. Our girls, we are playing with mostly stock rackets. The most usually what I'll do is I'll do a little bit of matching, make sure all the rackets are matching the heaviest ones. There might be like one or two girls that have weight on their rackets already, so I just match it to that. But usually, I think a lot of tennis players are creatures of habit. Once you find something that you like, it's hard to kind of change away. And so that's kind of the trends I would see. The girls are more even closer to stock. I mean, we're talking weight range and at least unstrung, anywhere from 300 to 310 unstrung. And swing weight, a lot lighter than the guys for sure. I would say mid 310s to maybe upper 320s. So yeah, and that's just kind of common amongst the two different genders in the college world. Of course, you have your outliers, like I think Texas. A lot of both their guys and girls, they have weighting done to all their rackets, and especially the University of Texas girls, a lot of them, especially at the top of the lineup, are already playing professional tennis. So they've got rackets that are, that come with a fair amount of heft. So it's kind of cool to see, every time a school comes to play, you kind of can't help but want to tinker a little bit with their equipment, or not tinker, but just kind of see how they trend. And so it's cool to see it in that way. In terms of string tension, I mean, what I'm noticing here is especially with the guys, we're still talking like mid 50s, which is decent. If it was me, I would definitely try and play lower. But I think with a lot of these guys, they grew up playing like I said, they grew up playing, grass, indoor hard, where the ball's moving fast, so they need to string a little tighter just to get a little more ball control. And so especially now that we're in indoor season, we'll have guys that sometimes will go up a pound or two as well when we go indoors. And so our lowest tension on the guy's side is 45. He's our Bolivian guy, Juan Carlos Aguilar from A&M. And so I'd say that 40, the mid 40s suits him pretty well because, he loves playing outdoors, slower court, loves to grind. And then, Luke is not even the tightest on the sheet. A lot of guys are at 54 pounds. It's crazy. For me, that's a little on the tight side, but for a lot of them, it gives them that sense of control. So don't mess with that. And then the highest on the roster is 57. And that's our German guy, Tim Ruhl. So understandably, over there in the winter months, probably playing indoors a lot. So string a little tighter. And yeah, girls probably about the same. Actually, whoa, this is a surprise. They're like in the 50-ish range, low to mid 50s. So typically you kind of see girls that trend. Normally I would see girls that string higher, a little on the tighter side than guys do, but it's funny because our girls team is stringing almost a little bit lower than the average of our guys team. So interesting. I guess moral of the story is there's not really much correlation other than kind of what you're used to growing up playing, and then even amongst different programs or different genders, there's not, might be coincidental, I don't know, but that's kind of the way we have it over here at TCU at least.
Yeah, sweet. Well, that's all the questions that I had. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me. It was really cool to we've had brief conversations, but it was cool to really sit down and talk tennis with you.
For sure, absolutely. I enjoyed it. And hopefully you kind of got to learn a little bit more, and it was kind of cool getting to kind of go through the whole process with you. So
Yeah,
I enjoyed
sweet.
it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, we'll obviously keep in touch, and I'll talk to you later.
All right, take it
All
easy,
right,
Kyle.
thanks.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.